There is this strategy, for lack of a better word, that was developed. It's probably been around as long as humans have been around. But in the modern era, it was first really clearly articulated in a book written in the 1920s after World War I by a young man who had fought in World War I, had been the victim of a gas attack, and his eyes were damaged, and he was in the hospital. And partly in the hospital, he started writing this book, and then later he started a political movement and was arrested for that and was put in jail, and he finished writing the book with the help of a friend of his by the name of Rudolf Hess. And that book was Mein Kampf, and the man I'm talking about was named Adolf Hitler. And in his book, he writes the following. This is, now, the reason I'm sharing this with you is apropos of our conversation last week with Greg Palast. Greg Palast's movie, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, is now available on Amazon for $3, basically. I think it's $2.95. You can watch it online. Or you can, buy the DVD. It's a little more expensive for the DVD because it's a physical product that gets delivered to you. And there's a book also. So there's this whole product constellation. You can learn all about it over at gregpalast.com, P-A-L-A-S-T. Because he's right, Greg is right in the middle of this. He's like the one who is telling the truth about the big lie. And our media is not. And so I wanted to talk to you for a little bit in this third hour of our program about the big lie. The big lie, of course, is the big lie that I heard Rudy Giuliani on TV talk about, how, busloads of those people were going from precinct to vote. Now, we know that A, doesn't happen. It can't happen. It's illegal. People go to prison. And beyond that, you show up in the wrong precinct, they don't let you vote. You show up in the same precinct, they say you've already voted. Right? I mean, we just know this is a lie. And yet it's being promoted by Newt Gingrich, it's being promoted by Donald Trump, it's being promoted by Mike Pence, it's being promoted by Republican governors and secretaries of state all over the United States. It was being promoted by George W. Bush and Alberto Gonzales. Alberto Gonzales had to resign as Attorney General because he fired 8 federal prosecutors because they all refused to use their budgets to look for people who were, quote, double voting, voter fraud. And they were blunt in telling him, because there is none. I mean, we now have one person. Right? One person who double voted. And guess what? She's a Republican Trump supporter. I mean, I should be memorizing this woman's name. I've got it somewhere here in my stack of papers. But it's like, so yeah, and she was double voting because she was afraid. Here it is right here. Her name is Terry Lynn Rote. So now, when Republicans go off, well, double voting, it's a big, it's a huge problem, voter fraud. The answer is, yeah, Terry Lynn Rote, 55 years old. According to the Des Moines Register, she allegedly voted early at an election office in Des Moines and then attempted to cast another ballot at another location. And in at least one interview, she... well, actually, I can't quote her because I don't have the quote in front of me. But several news stories or op-ed pieces have suggested that the reason she did this, she is a fervent Trump supporter, was that she was afraid that her vote was going to be stolen by Democrats. So she was going to vote twice to make sure her vote got counted, because she believed the big lie. So here's how Adolf Hitler wrote it in Mein Kampf. Volume 1, Chapter 10. All this was inspired by the principle, which is quite true within itself, that in the big lie there is always a certain force of credibility. because the broad masses of a nation are always more easily corrupted into the deeper strata of their emotional nature than consciously or voluntarily. And thus, in the primitive simplicity of their minds, they more readily fall victims to the big lie than to the small lie, since they themselves often tell small lies in little matters that would be ashamed to resort to large-scale falsehoods. So it would never come into their minds to fabricate colossal untruths, and they would thus not believe that others could have the impotence to distort the truth so infamously. Even though the facts which prove this to be so may be brought clearly to their minds, they will still doubt and waver, and will continue to think that there may be some other explanation. For the grossly impudent lie, the big lie, always leaves traces behind it, even after it has been nailed down, a fact which is known to all expert liars in this world and to all who conspire together in the art of lying. Now, Franklin Roosevelt referred to this back when he was president of the United States. Here's what he had to say about it.
The opposition in this year has already imported into this campaign a very interesting thing because it's foreign. They have imported the propaganda technique invented by the dictators abroad. Remember, a number of years ago, there was a book, Mein Kampf, written by Hitler himself. The technique was all set out in Hitler's book, and it was copied by the aggressors of Italy and Japan. According to that technique, you should never use a small falsehood, always a big one, for its very fantastic nature would make it more credible. If only you keep repeating it over and over and over again.
And this is really interesting. I mean, Hitler actually tapped into the psychology of this. You know, he says, as he says, they themselves often tell small lies in little matters, but would be ashamed to resort to large-scale falsehoods. It would never come into their heads, if we're talking about the average person, never come into their heads to fabricate colossal untruths, so they don't believe that others could have the impudence to distort the truth so infamously. In other words, you know, we don't tell big lies in our lives. We don't go around saying, oh, yes, I graduated with a PhD from Brown University. Yes, I went to the moon. I was the assistant, you know. We don't tell big lies. Because, you know, we would be embarrassed if we were caught. People might not believe them. I mean, there's a few people who tell big lies. We call them pathological liars, but most people don't. But Donald Trump right now is out there saying that there's a voter fraud epidemic going on, and therefore, and not just Trump. I mean, this is the Republican Party has been doing this now for 40 years to try to, quote, stop voter fraud. This goes back to the arguably back to the 60s, Operation Golden Eye, Eagle Eye, rather, that our former Supreme Court Justice William Rehnquist was part of in Arizona, of trying to stop illegal voters, right? And then it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and now it's like an industry. You got Chris Kobach and Greg Palast lays all this out in his movie, which I went to see night before last year in Washington, D.C. He just lays it right out. That, you know, Chris Kobach and his buddies, he's the Secretary of State of Kansas, and other Republican secretaries of state around the country are throwing people off the voting rolls because they have common names. Now, what is common about common names? They tend to be ethnic names. 80% of all the people in the United States whose last name is Washington are black. The vast majority of people in the United States whose last names are Kim or Lee are Asian. Gonzalez, Hispanic. Take all those names, throw them out. That's what's going on.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Because don't you know, they're registered 2-3 times, so they must be voting 2 or 3 times. Well, it turns out they're not. There's just a lot of people with those names. But the big lie is rolling along.